Alrighty, we're hitting right at noon, cool. Howdy, hello. Thanks everybody for coming to my talk. Thank you, Sophie. My name is Lammert, for those who don't know me. I really just also want to give a big thanks to GCAP and Creative Victoria, Film Victoria, Melbourne Games Week. I'm really happy to be here. This has been a very exciting week so far, and it's only Tuesday. This is a very special conference, I can tell. Just the talks that I've seen so far, and I think also my talk a lot of them are talks that I don't think would end up at a normal games conference, but are discussing incredibly important things for all of us moving around in the game industry. So so I'm very happy to be here, and so I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I'm Joe, and I'm super hyper nervous, and I think this talk's going to be full of weird feelings and emotions, and I'm not going to cry or anything, but it might get a little weird. Actually, I might cry. I don't know, I cry a lot. But let me explain. There's two reasons why I'm mentioning that this talk is full of feelings. One of which, I'll just say up here just very straightforwardly, I'm an incredibly anxious person. I navigate generalized anxiety disorder in my professional life and my personal life. I've navigated it for years and years and years. For those who don't know, generalized anxiety is essentially having excessive anxiety and being really talented at ruminating over things that you should not be ruminating about, and just excessive worry in your life. And I've managed it and I've gotten better at it and everything. And I also realize, as I'm saying this isn't something special. Anxiety is so prevalent within our industry and in our generation, but I will say also, that's in itself isn't special, but I also know it's not very typical to give a talk about professional career advice, starting off with, hey, I'm hella anxious. So that's a kind of unique. Also, most of the time when I talk about anxiety, it's not incredibly new information to people than my personal life, that I am anxious in some ways and neurotic in some ways. That's part of who I am, but it's a thing I never talk about on stages, and here I am saying that. So part of the reason why I wanted to talk about that too, actually, in this talk wasn't just so much to just do that or also give you a reason to go soft on my talk or anything, but I actually feel like it's something that does connect with my story about how to maneuver your way through the games industry. Also, the other thing I want to point out too here, before we really dig into it, is this talk may end up getting a little bit meta. So when I first saw that I could submit something to GCAP and that the theme was lighting the way, immediately I got this knee-jerk feeling of oh, I know exactly what I want to talk about. And that is how to maneuver around the industry and change your career, and to do it with confidence, and to do it with grace, if you will. And part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because when I first was in the industry, talking about anxiety, I was crippled with anxiety, and I had just anxiety and fear and self-doubt and imposter syndrome in such a way that it was just debilitating sometimes. I literally, I'll go through my career in a little bit to kind of show up how I've maneuvered around here, but when I first started out in games, I started a company with a couple friends, and I'm very proud of so much that we did, and yet those first 2 years, I literally went home and cried every single day, which seems a little excessive and was excessive. I also shout out to my roommate at the time, Kimmy, for being very patient and kind and listening to me cry about what a failure I was, and listen to me a lot and be very kind. I really doubted myself, and I was just really riddled with just insecurity. And I think that also stopped me from doing a lot of things. And I look back at that now. I've been in the industry since 2011. Yeah, 2011. And I just feel so sad for that 2011 version of myself, because there's so much excessive worry and anxiety and just shame that I had that just was not constructive and was just really painful, and I really wish there were things I could have told her. So that's part of what was like the conceit of me like doing this talk. So I'm like, yeah, I want to bestow that information onto people who are earlier in the industry or people who also are navigating these things. But then the funny thing is, I got accepted to GCAP. And when I got accepted, literally my knee-jerk reaction, I got the email being like, congratulations. And I immediately was like, oh, what, they believed I could talk about that? Okay, cool, yeah, great, I totally tricked them that I could talk about stuff. And so from there, then the first like few weeks that I really was like trying to hash out this presentation, I really went into this mode where I was just like, okay, have to prove that like I am an expert, like got to do some research, get some statistics, data, all this fun stuff. And then I hit a point that literally I did realize like I had to kind of recalibrate myself. I was literally going down that spiral of like what I am trying to say not to do as I was preparing for this talk. So yeah, so fun times. Neuroses and anxiety, always and forever, no matter how far you are in the industry. I'll also mention too, the other thing about this talk is previously another one of my experiences prior to where I am now, I used to work at the Texas Film Commission, which is akin to Film Victoria. I was their video game liaison, and I did a lot of presentations about careers in the industry. But those presentations were very, I don't want to say dry, because I tried to have fun with them, and I really also do think like I presented a lot of important information, but I really leaned hard on data, because data is just really just nice and solid, and just a nice thing to be like, hey, welcome to Texas, here's some jobs, cool, there are definitely jobs, I have data to show you, here's a bunch of organizations you can go to. I have a list of them. Here's a spreadsheet. That's very safe and very comforting. And this talk doesn't really feature any data, I don't think, of like actually the industry. So I apologize if that's what you're hoping to see today. But with that said, I do hope what we address is maybe relevant for whatever you are doing in whatever state you are in your career. So yeah, what are we talking about? So if you're here, I'm assuming either you're kind of curious about something new in the industry, whether that's being in a new position outside of what you're doing right now, might be in like a different department, or you might be interested in going indie, or you might be interested in going from indie to something larger. And so just kind of we're discussing like if that's possible, how that's possible, and how to avoid like the blocks of shame, fear, and anxiety as you're analyzing and looking at new opportunities. I have just like a quick list of some smart things to do. I couldn't think of a good, thoughtful way to title that. It's also, I'm not very good at titles. That's also why my presentation is about I just went with the first title, how to, find a job without having an existential crisis. So just keeping it simple. So got a smart list of things to do. Also, we'll get to the point, applying for the job. I'm not gonna get into like actually so much the nitty-gritty that maybe a lot of other talks might be in terms of ways to frame your resume, or like set up your resume or set up your CV, your cover letter. But I will discuss like framing your narrative and how to do that within your resume and your CV, and how valuable that is for whatever you're seeking out. And then from there, we'll touch on getting a job and still being riddled with shame, fear, and anxiety, why that all sucks. And then from there, we'll touch a little bit on moving forward in a new role and lighting the way, because that is the theme at GCAP. Cool. All right. Okie dokie. So I've already said I'm Joe a million times, but let's just say it again. So I'm Joe. I live in Seattle. I'm from Texas. Yeah, I say hey y'all a lot. I didn't realize how much I said it until I came to Australia for the first time. And then also when I moved to Seattle, I say y'all a lot. I say yeehaw sometimes, not as much. I say y'all a lot. So I'm the program manager at Private Division, which I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with Private Division, but Private Division is a publishing label. We're a publisher distributing independent games, larger budget typically, and with teams of about, larger budget independent games of about 20 to 40 people. Prior to being at Private Division, I was basically in Texas for my games career. Started a mobile game company called White Whale in 2011. I co-organized an event in Austin called Wagos Rancheros, or a collective, and then we also curated an event called Fantastic Arcade, which was is currently on hiatus, but was a magical little festival. I also then, as I said, worked for the Texas Film Commission. Then prior to moving to Seattle, I lived in the desert and baked bread and did some freelance work. And then somehow I found my way to Seattle. So yeah. And also I bake bagels. That's a thing that I do. And that kind of weirdly has actually been a component for me finding work within the game industry, which is why I put it as a bullet point. Yes, so I just described Private Division, but I'll tell you, in my role at Private Division, I'm the program manager. So essentially, our publishing team is set up in Seattle. We have our production team there. We have our really lovely, amazing QA team in Vegas. They're rock stars. We have our business and marketing team in New York, and then we have an international marketing team in Munich. So I'm the program manager, which essentially means I'm a bit of like the connective tissue between our internal producers, our external producers with our developers, our marketing and business team, our QA team. I am the person who says workflow and process a lot. I'm very type A. If somebody asks a question and I don't know, I typically say like, oh, I'll make a Confluence page for that. And I get very satisfied doing that. There was a time I was frustrated at work recently and I had to write it down that I was frustrated because I also made a chart afterwards and was so happy that I made that chart that I almost forgot. I was like, I have to remember there was something frustrating here too, but I'm so happy I made a chart. I love charts. Some of the stuff we're working on, you might be familiar with Obsidian's The Outer Worlds that's coming out on October 25th. Not to be confused with Outer Wilds, which is also a very awesome game. But that the past few months I've heard a lot of people being like, oh my God, Outer Worlds, I've totally played it, it's amazing. And it's like, you have not yet, but it is also amazing. Outer Worlds comes out October 25th, which is bananas to me. We also recently released Ancestors, which is Patrice Désilets' team of Assassin's Creed Panache. It's a interesting game where you're a hominid in Africa exploring, and it is a real bizarre treat, and I say that like in the most like loving way. I love that it's a really unique piece. Disintegration we recently announced, which is from V1. They're a team that's led by Marcus Leto, who's one of the co-creators of Halo. They're based in Seattle, and then also we recently announced Kerbal Space Program 2. We also distribute Kerbal Space Program 1, which has a really amazing community. All right, so can I actually do something new? So when I was an undergrad, so I was a film student, and I did enjoy my program, but one thing that I look back and I'm like really frustrated about was when I was there, basically I went into film and they were like, okay, hey, do you want to do screenwriting? Do you want to do media studies? Or do you want to do production? Those are your options, that's it. And so I was like, I don't know, I'm just a kid. So, so I picked screenwriting, which I like writing, but I felt very like, that kind of nurtured my own anxiety about like, I couldn't explore other things because I literally had to like check a box of what I was doing. And I understand that it is good to like sometimes focus on a path and like have that direction and like find a niche. But also I do feel like that was actually kind of did kind of embed this notion that it's like you just have to stay in your lane, that's what you're doing, you better pick it now when you're 20 years old, and that's what you're gonna do until you die, and if you do anything different, you are in big old trouble. So can I actually do something new? The answer is yes. Wouldn't it be really depressing if I said, no, you can't, thanks for coming to my talk? No, of course you can. I put together slides to do this, and I've done it, and a bunch of people here in this room have done it, and that kind of honestly, in a way, is a bit of the norm now in games. I will say, like when I first started in games, I was very apologetic, and I'll tell you a little bit more. You're hearing little morsels of my background. I'll give you like the full story in a while, but like, it took me a while to get into games, and when I was in games, or when I started, I was very apologetic of my background because it wasn't games related. So I was like, yeah, like, I'm sorry, like, yeah, I'm kind of weird, I don't know what I'm, like, I have a really unorthodox, like, trajectory in games, it's doing all sorts of weird stuff. But now I realize, like, I've hit this point where it's like, honestly, my story of coming from, like, previous industries or moving around in the industry is really quite possibly the norm at this point because, I think there's just a lot more opportunity to find your way into games. I think there's a lot of organizations that are interested in hiring people who haven't just been in games. So I need to stop saying it's a non-traditional because it's actually honestly now kind of pretty dang traditional. But there's a lot of value in itself moving around the industry. One of which is just strengthening your understanding of the industry. At this point, have worked as an independent, I've worked as a game developer in like very small indie. I've worked as a community organizer. I've worked in state government in video games, which is very unique, clearly, but did that. And then did contract work, and now I work for a publisher that sometimes feels very small, but is owned by a giant corporation. So, you know, that's a very different spaces. And I think in turn, like all these experiences have like informed my knowledge of the industry, clearly. Additionally, like, of course, expand your network. When you have new jobs, you meet new people. There you go. And I think actually one point that was important for me that I didn't realize was a big point in my career trajectory was just like finding career inspiration. Again, being in this space when I first started, even before games, when I first started in film and I wasn't really satisfied with stuff, it was really hard for me to figure out what I wanted to do because I just felt so like, I was like, okay, I said I'm doing screenwriting and this isn't very fun for me right now, but that's what I'm doing because that's what I said I'm doing, okay. And I just felt very like stifled. I think actually being able to explore new spaces, new companies, new roles, you know, especially, I mean, we're always exploring what we want to do. I wanted to say like the first like 5 to 10 years you're in the industry, I'm sure like that's like in itself an exploratory phase, but I think I realized I don't think the exploring ever ends. We're always shuffling and adapting and figuring out what we're doing next. So, and then lastly, I would say also moving around, finding new work is so nerve-wracking. Talking about anxiety makes me super anxious, makes my stomach get into knots, but when we're feeling uncomfortable, that typically means we're doing something very brave, we're doing something very strong, we're doing something that helps us grow. So I think those are all cool things. And I'll also say that doing something, so the other notion too, kind of similar to what I was saying when I was, I guess kind of tied to my undergrad notion of how to be in this industry, or any industry, was I was told basically that job hopping is a terrible idea and it's going to make you like a really terrible candidate for like any role, and you pick a job and you stay there. That is a very old generation mentality. This is not to say like sporadically, like spastically jump around from job to job, like aimlessly picking things, but there is value into being in positions for 2 to 3 years. And in fact, like most millennials now do think that's like both the norm for a lot of different reasons, both also in terms of just like finding work and gig economy and whatnot, but also just because like it is a space to explore things. And so, and there is an appeal as like an employer, including having a broader base of experience. My experiences come from all different worlds, and I do think that's part of what led me to where I am now. I like 100% know I wouldn't be at private division if I didn't have a background in indie games or library science, which I'll get to in a second, or living in the desert making bread for a year. Like all of that was really important to where I got now. Also gives you a better understanding of the industry in itself. It's fresh perspective. It's really exciting. I will say, like being at private division and being on the hiring side sometimes now, it's so exciting when we pull someone in who has a totally different background than any of us. And they contribute so much, like there's such a value add for so many reasons, but like they have a perspective that we just don't have. And I also would say just even the appeal of hiring candidates from different work backgrounds also includes that they have vibrant, curious energy, for lack of a better term. I kind of put that together. Like basically what I meant to say essentially is, you know, on our team when we've hired people from different backgrounds and from different spaces, whether that's in the games industry or in other spaces, you know, I feel like I'm going to keep using words that are like poor descriptors because I want to say like they got moxie and they got gumption, they got like all that fun stuff. Like they have this energy that they, like is a new, active, curious energy that sometimes, you know, can fade a little bit when you've been doing a career for a while. So yeah, so that can be like very appealing as well. But there are some things that may stop you from pursuing new work, even though you tell yourself you want it. So some examples of this, and these are examples that I definitely fell party to historically, include things like fear of failure, that if you apply for a job that you haven't had before, if you're working in QA and you're curious about working in production, that they're just gonna put that to the side, it doesn't matter. So why try? Or fear of what others will think of you. Like if you're wanting to, if you're wanting to leave indie and find, like you have a business and you want to like work with another team, but it's like, oh, then everybody will know I'm a failure on this like indie thing, and then I'll be, now I'm like working for the man, and man, I'm a nerd, and everybody's gonna make fun of me. I'm not projecting, that's not what happened to me. Fear that it's just too late. Feels like everybody in this industry is, or there's a lot of like very, very young people, and I've been doing this for this career, been working in this space for X years, so I'm just gonna look like a big old weirdo, like fear that it's just impossible. Why bother trying? So these are all things I've had. I'm sure all of y'all have experienced this as well. All of these fears would definitely go under shame. This is all driving us, this is all blocking us from actually doing the things that we want to do. Shame is so powerful and toxic and the worst. And I never thought that like shame would be something I would be talking about related to jobs. When I worked at the Film Commission, I wasn't thinking of the word shame. I wasn't thinking of the word shame when I was an indie game developer. That just seems like a thing that we talk about when we talk about feel lovey-dovey or just like embarrassment or doing bad things. It's not related to job seeking. But no, shame actually is, what I would say actually is the thing that blocks us from doing things that we want to do. I look back on my career and I look at the moments recently even where I'm nurturing anxieties, I'm nurturing, my fear of things, and I realize now that like shame is like the crux of all, it's like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, all these things that stop us from even attempting to explore new spaces. I'll tell you a little bit more about shame. I also wish I had like the same eloquence as she does, but I will just say, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Brene Brown. If you're not, you should definitely Google her. And I will also I'll preface this with I was very dubious of I saw a bunch of her book covers and they're all kind of feel like touchy-feely pop psychology that just seems like just TED Talk fluff. So I didn't read any of her stuff for a very long time until very smart people that I very much admire repeatedly kept bringing up her name. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna read some of her stuff. And I've definitely cried listening to her give talks. She's written some really amazing books, but she is a professor over at the University of Houston, and she is a research professor studying shame, vulnerability, empathy, things that are both not particularly quantifiable and are also historically not really researched. And her work also is very applicable to professional life, personal life, to everything, because shame is just drenched in everything. So I keep saying the word shame. So what is shame? Shame, as Dr. Brene Brown puts, shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of shame, or change. Gosh, I can read, I promise. So shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. So that is one of the other things that she's said here. Essentially, one other point that she makes, though I'm not gonna go down the guilt direction, but there is a difference between shame and guilt, which I think that's another reason why I never really thought about shame, because I was just I don't ever have shame. I don't feel I try to be good, and that's just that. Shame is not guilt. Guilt is actually constructive sometimes, because guilt is oh, I did something bad, but shame is literally just I am bad. I'm bad, so that's that. And that is a thing that it still exists somewhere deep in my core sometimes when I'm doing anything, whether that's work or relationships or friendships. There's still that core, that shame is lurking somewhere in me. And yeah, clearly it is hella toxic. Shame is very bad, destructive, hot garbage. That's my quote. It's not as good as Brene Brown's. So like I said, please go study or check her stuff out. So really honestly, this is the part where I feel my talk is kind of weird, because if there's anything I really want to really emphasize here, it's that shame is powerful, bad, destructive, hot garbage. It holds us back personally and professionally, and it just corrodes us. It's never helpful, it's never productive, it's insidious, When we nurture it, like, it manifests in like so many weird, toxic ways. It holds us back like when we don't even realize it. And like I've seen this, like I've even seen this now being on the side of like looking at resumes and whatnot. I can see that when people are like apologetic for their backgrounds or apologetic that they haven't had experience doing this thing, like they're like, I know I haven't done this thing, but like it's like, don't focus on that part. Talk about like the part that like fits into the role you're applying for. So I just really want to emphasize that, just know if you're learning, taking away anything from this, like my big thing I really just want to say is like, yeah, shame really like holds us back from doing things, and like shame is the thing that literally, if you're trying to change your role or you're trying to do something, like that is the first part that you have to like reconcile with, that like you have to manage that. And I will come back to shame in a second, but again, I'm not as eloquent as Brene Brown, but man, just like talking about like really understanding shame, like I think that drastically altered my career and altered how I perceived maneuvering my way through the industry. I'm gonna zip through this real fast, but just a variety of things from my own personal experiences of just like nice things to have as you're like trying to find your place within the games industry or trying to find your place like within any industry. There's a bunch of stuff available to you. Number one, the internet. What a concept. If you're interested, if you're curious about doing something, which like I'll give you an example. When I first started in games, I was a producer, and again, also in this like shameful mode, I was like, I don't know anything about being a producer, I'm just a dum-dum. And I maybe kind of sort of introduced myself that way sometimes, which probably wasn't a smart idea. But I did use the internet to, learn more about like what producers do. Literally, sounds like very obvious, but yes, Google, use LinkedIn, look at job descriptions on LinkedIn when people are hiring for these things. On social media, follow people who are in roles you're curious about. There's so many different aspects there. The other bullet point I would say too, and just like having like these tools as you begin like exploring in your career, seek out mentors, whether they're in the industry or whether they're not. I have a couple mentors that are adjacent to a lot of the work that I do. But I also have a mentor in Texas who is like an entertainment lawyer. I'm clearly not an entertainment lawyer, but like I have learned a lot from her about just like maneuvering around professionally, navigating career as like a woman, and there's a lot of, and also like talking to her and like hearing her own neuroses and hearing her own anxieties has weirdly enough been like the most validating thing ever, because she is amazing. Find classes related to your interests. That also, again, seems like very obvious, but I think, again, I do think shame is, again, the thing that sometimes holds us back from doing that, where it's like, oh, why should I bother, because like, it's not gonna be helpful, or people are gonna think it's weird that I'm taking a class and I'm 30 or whatever. It's not weird, it's cool. Taking classes is cool. Phew, classes are great. So do that, yeah, if there's classes available for anything you're interested in studying, that's definitely a thing you should do. Attend events related to your work interest, which, hi, we're at one, hooray, gay GCAP. Yeah, going to talks and meeting other people who are doing things in the industry that you're interested in doing, like, sincerely, that is how I have maneuvered around this industry. That is how multiple people in this industry have maneuvered around. Talking to people who have jobs in real life, again, related to the events, but also just related to, yeah, reaching out to people and just grabbing a coffee. I know that's like a thing that we hear a lot, and I know that's maybe even frustrating to be like, I know this, like, duh. But it is, essentially, it's very powerful to just like, to be curious and just be curious about getting to know people. Not so much about trying to even find a job, but just, and in fact, when you're first doing this, you shouldn't be finding a job. This list right here is like just kind of like your space as you're exploring the canvas of your life. Yeah, it is like just getting to understand how people got to where they got is both really informative for your own experiences, but also just, it's really validating too that everybody has weird narratives or different narratives. And then the last thing I put on here too, I mean, sincerely, like, if you have the availability to have therapy, counseling on your side in life, it's great for everything, clearly, but it is very good when you're trying to maneuver yourself professionally and just try to figure out what you want to do. These are all things that have been really, really helpful to me, and they're things that I didn't realize were so helpful in my 20s, but now like, I look back and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is why I'm here. So, all right. Say I've maybe convinced you that you should be curious about looking at other opportunities and exploring things, and you shouldn't be too scared. Cool, I'm glad. So let's say you're interested in applying for a job. how do we do this? So I'm just as an example, I'm gonna say like my role at private division. So again, I'm program manager. I wrote out the job description and now it's like really hard to read over here, but I can just tell you what it said in the, I was gonna read the job description from what I applied for. So private division is looking for a program manager to be involved. I can't read it. Anyway, maybe, since I can't read that, I'm just gonna backtrack and not go that route. Anyway, the job description for my role was specifically saying it's looking for somebody who's like hyper organized. Oh, hey, check that out, it's scrolling, sweet, thank you. Thanks. Yes, so here, now I can read this to you. So I was living in the desert at this time when I was looking for work. I'll tell you more about that in a second. Private Division is looking for an experienced program manager to be involved in releasing our games and updates on all supported platforms. In this role, you will act as a point of contact for our platform partners on both console and PC and coordinate between them with the development team and the Private Division production team to ensure smooth and successful launches. This role is responsible for managing platform-specific release issues, communicating status on releases, help redefine processes and procedures to make sure we have smooth launches, and automating as much of this as smooth as possible. There's a whole bunch of other stuff too, but like, to me, again, this is a great example of how like everyone's different, but that sounds so exciting to me because I love being organized and I love helping people and I love building workflows and plans to make things successful. So I read that. I didn't really have like first-party console experience, which was one of the requests of like the requirements. It was like first-party experience. I think also just like release management experience, which I didn't formally have, but I had mobile experience working as an indie. And yeah, I had a bunch of different experiences that I think like overlapped with the role I was looking for. So when you're interested in applying for a job, like I like to do this thing where you find the connected threads in your life that connect to the experience that connect to the job you want. And I kind of like when I think about this, I think about it like a magic eye, which I don't know if anybody can do that one right up there. It's a roller skate. Spoiler alert. I wish it's a little too on the nose because it's a bunch of roller skates that make more roller skates, but okay, anyway. But I like to think of it, you know, with a magic eye, you like kind of loosen like you look at everything, like you look at this whole image and you kind of like try to just like let it all fade into, just like loosen up, try to see like how everything can kind of like fit together. And then suddenly you see like this visual. And I think like, you know, it takes some time, like sometimes it takes you a second to get the magic eye working, but then once you do, it's like, oh my God, I see it, I can't unsee it. And I think that's kind of the way, when you're looking at all your experiences, it's kind of like looking at a magic eye. And it's how you essentially are able to find the connective thread between like all your experiences. The other important part when you're getting ready to apply for a job is to frame your narrative. So, you know, we're all humans, and humans are storytellers. Humans like to have narrative to be able to like make sense of things. But of course, like there's ways to frame a narrative in, you know, very different lights. And, you know, like there's all sorts of ways to like, you know, clearly like you can have a narrative be like extremely biased in one direction. You can have a narrative look at like one perspective. There's so many ways. And I think like, I will also say like this is a thing that I only recently realized is so powerful when you're looking for work. Because I will say I had a narrative that I think was still like kind of lurking in the shame zone, if you will, like when I told it. And I just kind of wanted to see, like try to give you an example of how framing stuff like can make a big difference in like finding that connective thread in your work. So what I'm going to do here is show you a personal example of how framing can be. So I'm gonna try to zip through this really fast. It's a lot of different things, but like these are essentially like kind of the different parts of my my career path, I guess, if you will, and just also like my growth as a human being. So so this first one I'm gonna lean in like with the kind of like a shamey, self-deprecating, self-doubt tone that I very much clung to for a very long time and still sometimes definitely still do. And then following my shame-fueled style narrative, I'll give you a more like magic eye connective thread version. Also, I really hope when I do this shame-fueled style one, like no one walks in the room because they're gonna be like, wow, this girl is really sad. so I'm not sad, don't worry. Okay, so all right, the shame-fueled version is, All right, so I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in college, and so I did film, and I chose screenwriting. I don't know, it was dumb, I don't know. So I did that, and then I went to LA, and for some reason, I guess I started working at a soap opera, and like, I wasn't good at it, and I don't know, it just wasn't good, so I failed in Hollywood, and then I was like, what do I do next? And then I was like, okay, I guess I could just go back to school, because if you fail, you go back to school, is that the thing? So I went back to school, and I studied library science, and I was like, okay, I like books, I don't know what I'm doing, cool, let's do that. So I did that, and hung out in libraries and worked in libraries, and that was interesting, but then, I finished school, and I don't know, this is like kind of dumb, but somehow like me and my friend, we started a game studio, we have no idea what we were doing. We made a video game called God of Blades with a few other people. We really didn't know what we were doing, so it was really good that we lived in Austin, because Austin has a really thriving indie scene, and so they basically, the indie scene is basically why we're able to do anything in games, because we didn't know what we were doing. And then for whatever reason in that space, one of the organizers of Wagos, asked if I'd join as an organizer, and I don't know, it's they probably just needed some help with stuff, so I helped them with stuff. It's really not a big deal, but yeah. Then also we did a card game at White Whale. That was the game studio that I started, and it was it was fun, but it also was a hot mess financial failure. So I don't know, we were dumb. So then from there, for some reason, I actually started working at the Film Commission, which I was doing video games there. I know that's weird, because film and video games, I know they're two different things, but that's what I was doing. I basically had to pretend like I knew everything about video games and convince the state of Texas that video games were important. So did that. I also was baking bagels, which I know totally weird and really doesn't make any sense, while I was working at this video game job. And then for some reason, I got tired working in government, and I decided to move to this weird desert town called Marfa. I don't know what I was doing. I couldn't figure out what I was doing next, so I just hung out there for a while, and I baked bread, and I did some other projects, and then now I'm at private division, so that's my narrative. It's real cool. Thank you. Yeah. All right, and that is literally kind of how I looked at this for a very long time. And I'm going to now try to have the connective thread style version, though I still feel like there might be some self-deprecation. All right, so I started school and I studied film, studied screenwriting, and ended up working in LA as a production assistant. And I really had some fascinating experiences, but I hit a point where I realized film wasn't for me. And so I realized I was fascinated in film production, but I didn't want to work in film production. So I decided to go to grad school and study film archives. And I was really interested in becoming a film archivist. So I ended up going to the School of Information at UT, and really enjoyed film archives, but I learned a lot more about other parts of information science, information-seeking behavior, user experience, digital collections, curating collections, and that was the stuff that really got me excited. I also really got excited. I was a reference librarian, and it was really, really fun to basically be a real-life Google and get information for people. So that was awesome. So funny enough, actually, a whole series of things happened by the end of my time in grad school, but me and one of my colleagues, and then a couple other friends, we started a video game company called White Whale. We were just talking about pulp fantasy books, and we started talking about games, and we realized we could actually make games ourselves. And so we were like, let's try that. So we did, and we were working on this mobile game called God of Blades, which was basically prog rock fantasy mobile game that doesn't exist anymore on the App Store, unfortunately. But basically it looked like a mural on the side of a really cool wizard van or something. That was the aesthetic. So we were fortunate because we lived in Austin, which has a really thriving, amazing indie community. And so we were able, because we hadn't worked in games before, we were able to seek the guidance of a lot of folks in the industry, and really a lot of people took the time to mentor us and help us and give us advice, and that helped us thrive as a game team. I also really became interested. I found it really appreciated the help that a lot of people in the community gave me. And so I was very active in Wagos Rancheros, which is an indie game collective there. And then at some point, because I was very active in that space, I ended up being a co-organizer, which was really cool because I really felt like I got to pay it forward with new indies. Also in that space, it's God of Blades was kind of our bread and butter for a while at White Whale, but we also did a card game. And that was a fun, really fascinating experience that just it was really cool to see the parallels between physical manufacturing and digital releases. Ultimately, I realized I hate physical product, but it was a really fascinating time. Then following that, because I think this really the catalyst of co-organizing at Wagos Rancheros, I started talking to folks at the Texas Film Commission. They were looking for a video game liaison. Essentially, they're supposed to, tell Texas that games are important, also essentially be like a public resource about the game industry. So it was kind of like a combo of my library school experiences coupled with my experiences in the game industry. I basically was a reference librarian about video games. It was like a perfect fit, and I loved just like helping constituents. I was like, you know, really cool to like get information for people. A side project I started while I was at the Film Commission was this thing where I was actually feeling kind of depressed, and I started this project where I was baking and trying to learn how to like make the perfect New York bagel. And I know that seems like a little bit random, but actually, weirdly enough, was really helpful in all my work because it was essentially like me producing a thing. Producing a bagel, which like actually has a lot of parallels to like game production. And I produced a lot of pop-ups in that time and did some events, and I blogged about my feelings, which was like really interesting to like realize that like just like a project like that could be so emotional. And actually doing that project coupled with my time at the Film Commission, I was there for a couple years, but then I just felt like I needed to recalibrate. I loved the industry, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I moved to Marfa, Texas, which is like a hipster desert town. It's bizarre. There's an art installation called Prada Marfa. That's what that thing is. It's just literally looks like a Prada store in the middle of nowhere. So went out there and I had some opportunity to do some freelance work, but I also just like baked bread and like was a barista, and that was amazing, and it was so good for my brain. And I think all of that like really helped me. Like Joe Bagel actually made me realize how much I love like creating process and like doing that. But I missed like also working with people. So I realized I wanted to like nurture my career in games, and I saw this opportunity at Private Division that they were looking for someone who essentially like was like the connected thread between teams, was the person answering questions, was kind of like the reference librarian within the organization. And so it felt like because it is like a very unique job, and it felt like a very pitch perfect fit for me. And yeah, so I applied, and then I ended up in Seattle, and yeah, now I'm here standing in front of you in Melbourne. So that's that. All right, so those are the two versions. They're two slightly different versions, and I know like the first one seemed a little bit aggressively absurd in some ways, but truly, honestly, like we all are like just so good at like dismissing our accomplishments and dismissing the things we do. It's so easy to do that sometimes we don't even realize we're doing that. Like I know it seems absurd as I was doing it up here, but like it is so insidious sometimes when we're just like, this wasn't a big deal, or like, you know, it was like, it's kind of dumb, whatever. So I'm just gonna have just a couple minutes, so I'm just gonna do this real fast. Quick, dirty tips. They're not dirty, they're just quick tips. So this is kind of based on my experiences now working at Private Division, working at other spaces, and seeing how people applied for jobs. One thing to just remember, similar to this framing your narrative, always tailor your CV for the position you're applying for. Like again, your story should be like essentially hoping to reach for that end point of, or maybe not end point, but the point that you're reaching for in that job. Don't emphasize that you haven't had this job before. I see so many cover letters that are like, I know I haven't done this thing before, but, and I get that like that is like a feeling that you have in your guts, but like, if you emphasize that, then it really like, the person reading your cover letter, reading your CV is gonna be like, they don't have experience. Instead, like emphasize the parallels in your previous experiences that would complement the role. For example, when I applied to Private Division, I ended up talking a lot about my work in libraries and library science and just like establishing information and process in a workplace because they desperately needed that. And that was like the most important component. Focus on the value add you bring, not what you hope to learn in the job. I will say that is like actually, clearly, I would hope with good employers, like there is the expectation that your new employees are going to learn things. But I will say like I have seen cover letters or spoken with people who a lot of times like the conversation is like, well, I really want this job because I think I would learn a lot about this, and I would learn a lot about that, and I'd learn a lot about that. And that all can be like well and true. But again, it's sort of similar to the emphasizing you haven't had a job before, it's good to at least like, it's good to show like the value add you bring to that team and just like zero in more on that. Be earnest, be authentic. I know those are all like kind of buzzwords, but like, and I know it seems like just so obvious, like be yourself, but like just, yeah, be sincere in everything you do because that's gonna make you the better candidate for the role. And honestly, if you're sincere and it's not a right fit, then it's not a right fit. In an interview, for the love of God, be curious. I like thought everybody asks questions in interviews, and I've learned a lot of people don't, which is bananas. And a lot of people who are like in the industry, and it's startling to me. Just be curious. If you don't have questions for the job you're applying for, you probably don't want that job. And with that said, ask genuine questions. Don't ask questions for the sake of asking questions. And last thing I'll say here is like when you're in this process, when you're exploring things, make sure the team and the job that you're interested in is right fit for you. You might be going through this process and you might hit a point where you go a couple interviews in and be like, yeah, this isn't like a good fit for me. I'm not gonna be a good fit for this team. Like, that's kind of the whole part of like the process of finding new jobs. It's kind of like dating in a way. It's like if you go out with someone a couple times and it's not a right fit, it's fine. If you go for a couple interviews and it's not a right fit, that's fine. So now let's cut real fast. I'm gonna do 1 more minute. So, okay, let's say you got the job. Cool, yeah, hooray. Okay, you got the job, everything's great, you're full of forever confidence, you defeated shame, anxiety, self-doubt, you're never gonna experience those feelings again, baby. So chill, you are basically the Fonz from Happy Days. Ayy. Yeah, so that's a lie. So that's you still, sometimes, or a lot of times. Even when you're in this new job, this is it me. So just like the last thing I really want to instill here is shame itself is like when you're getting into new roles and stuff, it's never fully disappearing. Best way to manage it and manage your professional life and your personal life is to have the courage to be vulnerable, be imperfect, be compassionate to yourself, and be compassionate to others. We're always going to be navigating this like hustle for worthiness. Like sometimes it'll be harder and sometimes it'll be easier for us. It's going to ebb and flow, and shame's always going to be there. Yeah, and this is just, I swear, this is still a career talk, but this is a thing that has driven me in like all of my work in the past few years, and at least like all of my work to like help me function as a human being and not go home and cry every single night. I still cry sometimes, but you know. But it's a good cry. It's a good cathartic cry. A few last notes. Not every job or every organization is going to work out with these tips. I guess I would say, like, you know, there are some teams that are like, no, this is exactly what we want, and there's like nothing in between. That's that. And there you go, that's a bummer. But I guess I'd also say, like, if that's how a team works, do you really want to work with that team if you are like in a space where you're exploring stuff? I'd also say that teams that do value vulnerability, courage, patience, empathy, they're going to be the ones that are going to be very receptive to these tips, which I am assuming a lot of people at GCAP would be into that and want to be a part of like teams like that. So as you go forward, hold on to these values. I would say, like, when you're on the other side, training and hiring, also, like, you know, have patience, kindness, empathy, curiosity for the people that you're interviewing. I've realized that, like, we've definitely taken chances on people on our team of private division, which is very exciting. We have like a very cool team of people that are from very different backgrounds. And I think it makes us super strong. Also means sometimes when I'm training, like, you have to have patience and you have to have understanding that, like, this is a new space for them, but it's like ultimately, like, they become such a strong, important part of our team. And then last, I'll just say, like, I believe these values are key to creating strong, diverse, interesting, happy teams. Like, all these values, like, actually just make really cool, interesting teams that I really think, like, that's represented in the organization I work with now, and I see that a lot in a lot of the teams here in Australia. Yeah, don't be afraid to have people that have not been working in the games industry, like, you know, on your team, or have been working in a different space. Like, yeah, this is how you light the way. So, yeah, thank you. I'm so sorry, I talked a lot, but I think, like, maybe we have 2 or 3 minutes for questions, maybe. I see it's 12:48, so if anybody has a question, there's a microphone coming around, so questions or anything? Awesome.
Hey, thank you. Amazing talk. I feel very validated.
Oh, thanks.
So I wrote my question down because it's quite important to me. How can we talk to employers about wanting to, like, explore, try new stuff without sounding as though you don't like your current role, like, especially as a newer employee? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually. And I think that is something I've kind of had to find in my role as well recently. I think part of it is just really emphasizing on both, like, curiosity and how that will make you well-rounded in your current job. Like, in my job, I have learned this past year so much about QA, and that's been so important for my job. Like, and that also, not only have I learned a lot about QA, but dang, I have so much respect for people who work in QA, because good Lord, they're the heroes, that, like, the unsung heroes. So I think just, like, emphasizing that it will make you more well-rounded, and, like, having skills, like, being able to, apply the things you learn to your own role. I think that actually is, like, really powerful. I'd also say, I know I rambled for a long time, so please feel free to talk to me in real life. Well, I guess this is real life, but, you know, Twitter, email, all the things. Yeah. Any other questions? One more maybe or so? Oh, do we have are we donezo? Okay. we might just be done. So I'm so sorry that I rambled a little bit too long, y'all, but if you want to talk to me, please. I really appreciate you staying here and listening to all this. Thank you so much.